the fair tax campaign that wants to do away with the income tax and the 16th Amendment. Sounds pretty good to me. Let's hear it for Fair Tax Campaign. Ken Hoagland has given several years of his life to tirelessly leading the Fair Tax Campaign. Ken joined us from Houston for the summit this weekend. He's been a warrior for lots of good causes in Texas politics. He helped clean up lawsuit abuse with Texas tort reform. He fought for that cause Michelle Malkin was speaking to a moment ago of school choice in Texas. This guy is a warrior for conservative constitutional reform, to prove that not only are we rooted in the past, in the best traditions, but that we are helping invent a better future for freedom in America. Ken Hoagland will introduce our featured speaker of the first afternoon session. Please help me welcome Ken Hoagland.
Thank you. I'm going to introduce one of the greatest speakers that you've heard in a while in a few minutes. But before that, he's asked me to tell you a few things about the issue I so love and lead, the fair tax. 237 years ago, the seeds of this great nation were planted and began as a tax protest in Boston Harbor. We revolted against a distant and arrogant government. We had been loyal, but out of that revolt, 234 years ago, grew a brand new idea in the history of the world, that no government has power except the power that is granted by those who are governed. God imbues us with our inherent rights, not kings, not aristocrats. We are born with those rights, and they are given to us by our Maker. Our vow then, and the brilliance of our founding fathers, was that we would limit government. They understood that all government, no matter how good, takes power unto itself. It is human nature. And so they built in vexing frustrations for those who would grow that power. They've split our government into 3 branches. They made our states equal to the federal government. And they gave the ultimate authority for the power that the government would have to us. In many different ways, they gave us the tools to control that government. But let's take a close look at how that noble promise has evolved over these last 234 years since the signing of the Declaration and our great Constitution. We are today taxing our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren with the greatest levels of debt that this nation has seen since World War II. We are borrowing trillions of dollars from China and other countries offshore, and we are securing those loans with pledges of our children's future earnings, generations who have not even yet been born. I call that taxation without representation all over again. We have a tax system that has become so badly corrupted that it undermines the Made in America label and every single American. Our pursuit of happiness, our liberty, is undermined by a federal government that grows and grows and grows and grows, fueled by money taken out of our paychecks before we ever see it. For an awful lot of Americans, when a politician stands up and says, here's the money I'm bringing home to the district in earmarks, here is the $1 trillion that I want to spend on the country, they say, oh, good idea. We've got big problems. Spend it. Good. They don't see that money is coming out of their own pockets. Because of Milton Friedman's regret in World War II, he suggested the idea, well, let's withhold those taxes out of paychecks, and people will take home what's left over of the fruits of their labors. So for an awful lot of people, you ask them, how'd you do on your taxes? Oh, great, I got back $200. Well, congratulations. And how much did you pay out to the federal government to fuel unrestrained growth throughout the last 12 months? I'm not real sure about that, because it is hidden from us and held from us, and we have divorced the idea that what our government spends comes right out of here, our pockets, our pursuit of happiness, our future, and now the future of our children and grandchildren. I submit to you that we will not be able to take back our country until we take back our government. And we will not be able to take back our government until we bring this corrupted tax system to heel. It cannot be fixed in little steps. We have tried that. And the most successful reformer was our great President Ronald Reagan. Since those 1983 tax reforms, 18,560 loopholes have been sold off at an auction in Washington, D.C. The fair tax does more to shift power from our federal government to the individual citizen than any single piece of legislation in the history of the country. How? And why does Washington hate it so much? When you hear why they hate it so much, you're going to know, if you haven't heard about the fair tax, that you're going to like it. The fair tax says you pay your tax at the cash register. Everyone contributes. If you're an illegal immigrant in this country, you're going to pay the tax when you buy things. 10 to 20 million illegal immigrants will become taxpayers overnight. April 15th becomes a nice spring day. We rip the income tax system out by the roots and throw it away as an attack on our liberty. And I heard Miss Malkin talk about illegal immigration, and I agree. I began my career working for a Texas governor, traveling the border, all along the border, Texas to California, meeting mayors on both sides of the border. And I will tell you this, there is no greater economic disparity in the world as between Mexico and the United States. It is economics that pulls people here. If you want to fix illegal immigration, attack the economics of coming here. How does the fair tax do that? Well, it's unlike any other sales tax you've ever heard of. If you express it as a sales tax, it's a 30% tax. Raises every penny now raised by the income tax and Social Security and Medicare taxes, but eliminates both. Now that's regressive without an elegant part of this idea. It's a monthly prebate. It gives every American family 23% of a poverty level income divided into 12 equal payments. It wipes out any tax on those below the poverty level. It gives the middle class $29,000 of federal tax-free spending a year. You don't get the prebate if you're here illegally. How many illegal immigrants would remain in this country if they were paying 23% more, or 30% if you express it as a sales tax, than any other person here? We would go to the root cause of illegal immigration and we would solve it right there. I am not saying we don't need fences, we don't need security on our border, because terrorists are still crossing our borders, and the economics will not stop them. But you pass the fair tax, you've solved illegal immigration in this country. That's one. Number two, you let each citizen decide the timing and amount of the tax they pay to the federal government. You take home your whole paycheck, nothing is withheld out of it by the federal government. The IRS is done in, April 15th is a spring day. You decide by your consumption choices how much tax you will pay and when. Consumption is a far larger base than earnings. We have 80 economists, including a Nobel Prize winner, who have spent years and $22 million. This is the best research legislation ever presented to the Congress. And they say you do the fair tax, you lift taxation from manufacturing, labor, and investment. The United States becomes the most favorable tax environment in the world, and we will see somewhere between $10 and $15 trillion of investment, now offshore, private investment, come rushing into our economy. That means we all go back to work. It means the most productive workers in the world are in the catbird seat again, and we've created a new era of American growth. When we first developed this, we took it to Washington and said, here it is. You don't have to pit income groups against each other anymore because it helps each income group. Illegal immigrants aren't going to like it. Drug dealers aren't going to like it. $1.5 trillion in the underground economy, they're not going to like it because they become taxpayers. But it helps us all and unleashes the American potential for economic genius. The personal computer wasn't invented in a congressional office in Washington. It was invented in a garage in San Jose. Let us loose. Get that tax system out of the way. We were a little naive because the congressmen and senators looked at us and said, wait, do you mean we can't sell off pieces of the tax code anymore for power and profit? Do you mean the $1.5 billion tax industry lobby a year goes away? Is that what you're saying? Are you saying that every single consumer sees the cost of the federal government every time they make a purchase, and we're connecting the cost of the government with personal wealth? Yes, that's what we're saying. Thank you. There's the door. We'll have to force this on Washington, and that is the biggest challenge of the fair tax. When we describe it to people, they love it. I've spoken in union halls, and they love it. I've spoken at tea parties, and they love it. I've been on 700 talk shows in the last 3 years, and people love it. But the biggest challenge we have is that so many Americans no longer believe that promise of the Founding Fathers, that unique and noble idea that this can be a nation whose public policies are determined by the public, whose government powers are limited by we the people. So many of us have given up on that idea that I sometimes think that that is my biggest challenge, convincing Americans that what is good for us and bad for Washington can be made to happen. It just takes belief in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. And a man who has studied that, first from a financial point of view and then from a public policy point of view, is the man I'm going to introduce next. He started the Brandywine Fund in 1974 and soon proved himself to be a canny stock picker. He made a lot of money for his clients. He and his wife started it. CNBC said, out of the last century, he is the longest surviving stock picker. He's a gentleman scholar from the history books. We don't see a lot of them these days, but there are a few. He took his instincts and his acumen and his understanding of our financial system, which reflects the American ambition to succeed, to invent, to take risks, and he applied it to public policy. He sold the fund in 2001. And since then, he's been living up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and he has been studying health care and tax systems and immigration and our relationship with the Middle East and 100 other things that are so important to our future as a country. And he has used that intellect and that instinct and that understanding of a man of faith and a man of strong family values, and he has applied it to public policy. He's probably the smartest man in the room. Michelle noticed that I said man. And that's why I want to introduce you to a great friend of the fair tax, a great friend to all of us, a great friend to America, a citizen scholar, Foster Friess.
Thank you. I'm going to give the room a footnote before you speak. Okay. We'll be sending Ken Hoagland to an enthusiasm class. Ken, as soon as you can get excited about your topic, you're going to start to move audiences. Before we hear from Foster Friess, and it is the same guy in the photo, he just took the Stetson off in respect to the room. I've taken a long, hard look at the clock and a long, hard look into my soul. And it strikes me that we can't talk about controlling taxes and spending and the growth of government if we can't control our own schedule between now and the next meal, dinner time, and the Dennis Prager time. So some of you have been furrowing your brow as you look at that blue schedule with no times on it in your folder. Here goes times. Hold us accountable. Mary Catherine Ham will start at 3:10. Joseph Phillips at 3:45. John Eastman and the Tea Party panel at 4:20. And I'm going by 35s. Greg Brophy and the State Issues panel at 4:55. And we will have a quick but triumphal session for the Lone Tree Declaration at 5:30. And that's our afternoon. And now you are in for a huge, huge treat with Foster Friess. We're sending him to comedy and sense of humor classes, but otherwise you're going to enjoy Foster Friess.
Just so I clarify, how much do you want me to cut my talk from 40 minutes down to 10, or?
You have 30 minutes and 30 seconds, Foster.
Well, that sounds like I could do that. I just want to spend a little time talking about health care and taxes, but the fair tax is pretty well explained. But I want to put in the context of jobs. But before they do that, I want to thank Ken Hoagland for that great introduction. But what he left out is how humble I am. And so I'm working on a book just to make sure you all understand that. It's called America's 10 Most Dynamic Leaders of Today and How I Trained the Other 9. Now, on the issue of jobs, you heard this morning why it's so important, not just to give sustenance to the families who need shoes and clothing and food, but what Arthur Brooks said, to give us a sense of value, a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, that we're contributing, that we're part of God's plan, that we're hands and feet to a hurting world, so we can be part of the overall dynamic of we're either in the entitlement class or the productivity class. And when I talk about jobs, I like to think of a great story in Jackson Hole. We have a classic sheriff. There's a great big handlebar mustache, and he interviews these young kids from all over Wyoming to see if they can be part of the sheriff's deputies. So this guy comes over, about 22 years old, from Lander, Wyoming. And so Zimmer, the sheriff, says, now, do you know who killed Abraham Lincoln? He asked all kinds of bizarre questions just to understand where the kid's coming from. He says, yeah, I really don't. So the young guy goes home, and the wife says, honey, did you get the job? Yeah, I think so. They got me working on a big murder case. To recreate jobs in America, we need to do 4 things. 1, we must work hard to reduce litigiousness. It's insane. We must curb that. Number 2, we must simplify our regulations. We need regulations. And if you go on the website, you can see Bill Clinton saying the problem with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is that we didn't listen to the Republicans by having enough regulations. So regulations have to be smart. Right now, we have $60 trillion in gross national product of all the companies, all the countries in the world. We have $600 trillion of credit default swaps. That was never regulated properly. So the whole idea of having correct, proper, but yet simplified regulations is the second key to creating jobs in America. And if anybody you know, retired executives who are in the telecommunications area, the pharmaceutical area, the air transport area, funnel them into me so we can get a cadre of citizens who no longer have an axe to grind because the regulations will affect their company's profits. So we can have senior statements say, okay, we're going to redesign the regulations for a given industry and start over. Scrap the old ones and start the new ones. Simplify regulations. 3, you heard the key to our success will be this fair tax. It will make the United States a global tax haven. It will create so many solutions to the bureaucracy. Think of all the foundations that have to fill out all these forms in order to keep their tax deductibility. All the churches that have to be careful what they say. That all goes away. And people get sort of shocked when they say, well, it's a 30% tax, but let me take a minute to explain something critical. Let's pretend this cost $100. Now, the people that created the lacquer, the wood, the people that shipped it, the people that trucked it, all paid corporate income tax. Under the fair tax, all the corporate income taxes go away. So now if this was $100, now it could sell for $80. So if you put a 30% tax on that, you're not talking $130, you're talking $104. Corporations do not pay income taxes. They collect income taxes. And then they pass it along in the price of the product. Obama says we're not going to tax anybody under $250,000 income. Then he puts a tax on wheelchairs, on tanning salons. Do you think people making less than $250,000 are going to pay that tax? The politicians, Republicans and Democrats, have hidden these taxes from us for so long that it's about time we try to change the paradigm. Right now, the paradigm is the politicians, Republicans and Democrats, decide what they want to spend, then they send us a bill. I am so hopeful and so excited about the potential of what could happen beyond 2012 because Obama's overplayed his hands. And now the American giant of the 70% that Arthur Brooks talked about has awakened. They expected 300 people to show up, 650 show up. The 70% has awakened, so we have the hope of taking the House, of taking the Senate, of taking the White House. So let's be hopeful about that rather than just talking and complaining about the past. Complaining about the past will get us nowhere. We have to take the hope of the future of what we can do with winning the seats in November, and that's what I encourage you to spend your time between now and November to focus in on. If we can get the fair tax in, reduce the cost of health care, simplify regulations, reduce litigiousness, all that is possible. And the hope is here because you represent the people who can make that happen. Now, let me spend a little time about health care. Health care was billed as we have to provide access to all these people. Access was a big thing that Obama tried to solve. That is not the problem. Yes, there are people who fall through the cracks. There are people who maybe aren't well served through the insurance system, but there's a lot of people who just opt not to have it because they'd rather have a flat screen TV. Let me tell you what the real problem is, and everybody knows what the real problem is. There's no doubt about it. The problem is cost. Cost. Now, what would happen to the cost of groceries if you went through the checkout counter and Charlie Fote here is a very generous guy, took me golfing yesterday, very generous, he picked up your bill. What if someone else is picking up your grocery bill? What would the cost of groceries be? We have to develop a system which encourages health savings accounts, high deductibles, where people have an opportunity to have skin in the game. That's the only way we're going to bring down cost, is when every one of us, when we're asked... As you know, the Democrats completely wiped out health savings accounts. The bill did. Now, secondly, what is the other element in the cost of health care? What's the second most important element? People want to say tort reform, minuscule. On the lack of electronic records, minuscule. Not selling across state lines, minuscule. Mandates. In Massachusetts, the politicians cannot resist. You must carry aromatherapy, car therapy, chiropractic, all these different mandates. In Connecticut, you can get a hair transplant in your insurance. John, can you get the airline tickets to Connecticut for this guy? So if we can just deal with those two things, reducing mandates and giving people skin in the game, how do we do that? Ideally, employment and insurance should be divorced. When you change jobs, you don't renegotiate a house policy. When you change jobs, you don't renegotiate your auto policy. And as you know, the only reason we do it for health care because of the tradition of World War II, where the government allowed companies to compete for employees based on health care benefits, retirement benefits, because they couldn't raise salaries. That's the only reason. So there's a very simple way of how we can achieve this. Now, Michelle Bachmann is one of my real idols. But I have a contrast with her in terms of the idea she has a 32-page plan. This plan that we worked out, including Obama's supporters, is less than a page. And here's all we're asking the federal government to do. Until fair tax comes into play, where this will be a non-issue, the first thing we want the federal government to do is to change one line in the IRS code that says, no longer, let me back up, that says a company, an employer, can get the same deduction for the amount of money they deposit into each of our health savings accounts, the employee's health savings account, as they now deduct when they send the money to an insurance company. That does not change the tax ramification for the employee. It does not change the tax ramification for the employer. And it does not change the tax ramification for the government. It all stays the same. But suddenly, you've empowered several hundred cost control centers. Every employee now is going to have the opportunity to buy a higher deductible, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, whatever they want. So they can decide, you know, my knee does hurt, but instead of getting an MRI, hey, doc, let me ice it for a few weeks, and some ibuprofen, I'll get back to you. Or, I do want the MRI, but I understand here in Salt Lake City, they're X, and I'm going to go over to Denver where they're 30% of that. So suddenly we become consumers. The lack of knowledge about healthcare in our country is unbelievable. I sat in a meeting with 5 sitting governors and 3 key insurance executives and a couple of large employers. One of the presidents of insurance companies said, you know, we got to do something because we're 37th in the world. I bet a lot of you heard that we're 37th in the world, heard that statistic. You know where that came from? In 1999, in the year 2000, a report based on 1999 statistics was issued by the World Health Organization from our pals at the UN that had 5 categories as to how they evaluated health care. First category was patient outcomes. What do you suppose the United States ranked? We all know. Number 1. What do you suppose they gave as a weighting to that category? 12.5%. The next rating was fairness of financing, where Morocco and Colombia outranked us. Fairness of financing, that means nobody gets health care. They ranked that 25%. So 87.5% of the rankings in the World Health Organization that wound up the United States for being 37th was based on nothing to do with health care outcomes. But yet this is the deceitfulness that our opponents use to try to sell people. We have to do something. We have to prevent these terrible things like Natoma. President Obama gets up and says, poor Natoma. She couldn't afford her health insurance, so she dropped it. And then she got cancer in America. The next day, Cleveland Clinic said, by the way, we're treating Natoma, and we don't plan to put a lien on her house. And by the way, last year, we did $99 million of charitable care. We have to get the truth out to America. If you look at all the other deceitfulness that has taken place in this debate, President Obama gets up in front of the teleprompters and says, we are giving you another choice. You like your private plan? You keep your private plan. The private plan's not working out for you, you can opt to the public plan, the government plan. You like your doctor? Keep it. At the time he said that, he knew that most people get their health insurance through an employer. If if CCU decides that they need to move to a different system, a government system, whatever, the employer decides. The employee has no choice. But yet that is something that the American people just bought in lock, stock, and barrel. So that's a one-pager. It's simple. And the key thing after that is we must honor the 10th Amendment. Health care should never even be discussed at federal level. The people in Colorado can figure that out. Now, how do we win? How do we get these things into place? This unbelievable outpouring of support for American values and the time you spent coming here and the investment that Bill Armstrong and John and all the volunteers made is absolutely worthless potentially if you don't do something about it. If you go home and tell your neighbor, oh, that Michelle Malkin was good. I just had the best time, Michelle Bachmann. And then I disagree a little with Michelle saying, send everybody you know this information. And the wonderful lady that asked a question last night and challenged Michelle, why aren't you, your conservative colleagues, saying what you're saying? I want every one of you and every one of us to think about what is our responsibility to get the word out. Since I sold the company 10 years ago, I dedicated my life to encouraging private sector solutions. Rather than waiting for the government or the politicians to get the word out, let's tell Michelle to stay home, not give more speeches. Every one of you give a speech. Okay. Now, here's an idea I'd like you to think about. Last night, we basically had a freedom dinner. It's kind of a permutation of a tea party. But we're talking to ourselves. If we want to change our country and get these policies in place, every waking moment between now and November should be dedicated to one final metric. I talked to Tea Party people, they're all excited. Well, we had double the people showed up our rally. Oh, we had a great speaker and all that. The only metric that I want you to think about is how you can use your influence and your circle of friends to get as many ballots in the box in November for the right candidate. That is the only bottom line metric that counts. Now, what are some of the ways in which we can do that? Maybe this idea appeared today when Arthur Brooks said, of the 30% that are against us, 10% of these, 10 percentage points of those are people under 29. So why don't we get a hold of Leadership Institute, Borton Blackwell, who has people on every single campus, and let's pretend Will Armstrong here is a little younger. You're on campus at Clemson or something, and we have him watch Arthur Brooks' speech 3 times in a row, and then he gets up and delivers it on campus. We could have Arthur Brooks. We need to clone Arthur Brooks and have that speech given all over. That was a powerful speech. Now, if you are in a safe district, I'm in Wyoming. Our congressmen, 2 senators, they're solid. They're on our side. Why do I want to spend time getting petitions to support them or give them money? Be polite, send them a certain courtesy amount of money, and then figure out how do we get the people in Wyoming or in your House district, if it's safe, to send money to Carly Fiorino trying to take out Boxer or Angler to try to take out Reed. So we have to think strategically. It doesn't do a lot of good for us to have these kinds of meetings and rallies and demonstrations unless it's used to get names, emails, Twitter accounts, Facebook, to leverage the communication so we can get the message out and say, we're not 37th in the world. And you don't have a choice if your employer decides to change your insurance. We must develop all the communication tools of the modern age that the left has got in spades. We all know Custer got wiped out by the Sioux because he's maybe outnumbered, but what people also don't realize, Custer had Springfield 53 models, which were single shot. The Sioux had Winchester and Remingtons were repeaters. We must have the best technology in terms of Twitter and Twitter and Facebook and learn how to use it. Most of you in this room, you need about a 14, 16-year-old kid to come alongside you. But we must do that. Let me show you some examples of some of the things that could be available to you if you have a freedom dinner or freedom lunch, so you can convince the people who are soft Obama supporters. So let me reemphasize again, if you're in a safe district, be polite to your senator and your congressman, but find out how you can help someone in another district that could be winnable. And don't go to a district that's not winnable. There's some places, I don't know, Maxine Waters or Markey, who they are, they're not winnable. Don't spend your time there. And if you've got friends there, get them to redeploy into the list that you can find of the congressional seats that are winnable. We have to concentrate on the House and only on those seats that are winnable. Now, get yourself educated. You and I have to get educated. When I started out on this trek, I couldn't believe all the things I didn't know and all the things that were in the bill that I had no idea were there. And so let me show you one little resource that's available to you. It will run a little video clip that runs 3 minutes, and it can show what is available to you to show to your friends when you have your own freedom dinner or your own little get-together with friends. And you have to pick out the things from the website all around that works for the people that you're going to address. These are not bad people. I have a friend who was a member of the Democratic Leadership Committee, very, very high-ranking guy. We were hiking the other day, and I happened to be talking about spiritual things. I said, you know, I love the definition of love I just heard the other day. Love is the suppression of self-interest in order to serve others. He said, oh, you speak to me. These people want to do what's right and want to do as well, but they just aren't educated. All they have is PhDs. They probably never had a lemonade stand. They probably never had a paper route. They probably never sold tickets to the Boy Scout bean supper to raise money for camping. So we just have to help educate these folks. So let's run the first clip and see an example of what you could show to some of your friends.
I happen to be a proponent of a single-payer universal health care plan. But as all of you know, we may not get there immediately, because first we've got to take back the White House, and we've got to take back the Senate.
So what I've said is, let's set up a system where if you already have health care through your employer and you're happy with it, you don't have to change doctors, you don't have to change plans, nothing changes. If you don't have health care, or you're highly unsatisfied with your health care, then let's give you choices, let's give you an options, including a public plan that you could enroll in and sign up for. That's been my proposal.
A plan that was shopped around to all the Democratic candidates by a Yale University political science professor named Jacob Hacker.
Well, I think the insurance industry will be very opposed in total. I do think that we shouldn't forget that there's going to be a divide, as there was in the early 90s, between large and small insurers over the best course forward. This would eliminate, I think, the small group market insurance industry, right? It's premised on doing so.
And next to me was a guy from the insurance company who then argued against the public health insurance option, saying it wouldn't let private insurance compete, that a public option will put the private insurance industry out of business and leave my single Democrat, he was right. The man was right. Here's what
Someone once said to me, this is a Trojan horse for a single payer. And I said, well, it's not a Trojan horse, right? It's just right there. I'm telling you, we're going to get there. Over time, slowly, but we'll move away from reliance on employment-based health insurance, as we should, but we'll do it in a way that we're not going to frighten people into thinking they're going to lose their private insurance. We're going to give them a choice of public and private insurance when they're in the pool, and we're going to let them keep their private employment-based insurance if their employer continues to provide it.
But I don't think we're going to be able to eliminate employer coverage immediately. There's going to be potentially some transition process. I can envision a decade out, or 15 years out, or 20 years out, where we've got a much more portable system.
One of the virtues of it, though, is that you can at least make the claim that there's a competitive system between the public and private sectors.
This is not a principled fight. This is a fight about strategy for getting there, and I believe we will.
Let's have an honest debate. We can agree on that.
So that gives you an idea. Did you like that? Now, here's another one you could share, and it's something you all know, but it's a very clever way of showing other people who don't see the light yet. And here's a 41-second cartoon.
A public option, a public health insurance option to provide more competition, create some competition for the private insurers, keeping insurance companies honest.
There's a wealth of information. Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife, has started something called Liberty Central. Log on to that. On our website, we're trying to create a portal where you can go to all the different sites. You can go to Frank Gaffney's sites. We can go to different sites so you can learn what the issues are about eco-hysteria, which is my name for global warming. Or you can go to the immigration issue, and they're all there to provide you that kind of information. In the remaining few minutes, let me tell you why I think there's something far more important than everything we've talked about so far in terms of what we have to do. And it's been alluded to a little bit. And that is we must reinvigorate, restore, encourage, nourish the underlying Christian values that founded this country. Now, a lot of people on the left get very, very nervous, and people in this audience maybe get nervous because we don't want a theocracy. Harry Truman 5 times read the Bible 5 times before he was elected president. We didn't have a theocracy under Harry Truman's regime. He called it a Christian nation. But we had a set of values that was so different. Think of all the things that have made our lives great when we read God's word. In Philippians, always consider other people more important than yourself. Also in Philippians, whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is right, whatever is noble, whatever is deserving of praise, dwell on these things. How often do we get so stuck in negativity? That's God's exhortation to be a positive thinker. And let's remember, this is my favorite definition of sin. Small s, capital I, small n. And sin is really eye trouble. My needs, my rights, my feelings, my expectations. You all know C.S. Lewis wrote the book Four Loves, and the one that we can talk about that stunned me when I heard it was the agape love that Jesus talked about. Love is not an emotion. It's an act of the will to want something for someone or to do something for someone that is in that person's best interest without expecting anything whatsoever in return. How difficult is that? If we do something nice for someone, we at least want them to say thank you. If they don't say thank you, we feel offended or angry. But we need a content within us, a spiritual content that allows us to overcome our human nature of always wanting something back. And if we can develop that in our country, in our younger generation, and among us, we all need to constantly, every day, remind ourselves of the needs to die to self so that Christ can live through us. We were not designed to seek our own happiness and pursue our own agenda. God created us to be a channel of His love to other people, to be His hands and feet in a hurting world, to be a blessing to every person He puts in our path. How would the world be different if we worked harder to achieve those values? Look how we assess people. The Christian mindset is you don't assess a person by his past or where he is today, but you assess him by what he can become, what he or she can become. Think of all the potential that you see in the young people around you or in ourselves that are untapped, that we have so much more potential to be a part of God's solution if we just make a commitment to do it. And I'm convinced that that is the solution to our country's problems, and we can't end the economic recession without ending a moral recession. I thank you for being so kind to listen to me, and God bless every one of you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.